The distant silhouette of Mercy Blackwater was barely visible through the dust-laden rays of the setting sun as Xavier Holden rode into view. What caught his attention wasn't her beauty, though that would come later, but the horrific sight of her bound form against the ancient oak. Her head slumped forward in exhaustion, or possibly something worse. The year was 1874, and the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as the men who sought to tame it. Xavier had been trailing a gang for 3 days, following the destruction they'd left in their wake through small settlements across the territory. The Colter Gang, as they'd become known, had terrorized the region for months, and Xavier had made it his personal mission to end their reign of terror. He dismounted his dappled gray stallion, Storm, and approached cautiously. His spurs clinked against the hard, packed earth, the only sound breaking the eerie silence. As he drew closer, the woman's head lifted slightly, revealing a bruised but defiant face. "They'll be back," she croaked, her throat dry from hours without water. "You should leave before they return." Xavier's weathered hand reached for his canteen. He held it to her lips, allowing her to drink while he examined the crude rope bindings that cut into her wrists. "Who did this to you, madam?" "Colter and his men," she whispered after drinking greedily. "I refuse to sell my land. So they decided to make an example of me." Xavier's jaw tightened as he drew his knife and began sawing through her bindings. "The name's Xavier Holden. Most folks call me X." "Tamara Fairchild," she replied, wincing as the rope fell away and blood rushed back into her hands. "Most folks call me Tamara." A ghost of a smile crossed Xavier's face as he finished cutting the ropes at her ankles. "Well, Miss Fairchild, I reckon you're free now." As Tamara took a tentative step forward, her legs buckled beneath her. Xavier caught her swiftly, one strong arm around her waist. "They'll learn to fear Mercy now," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon where dust clouds indicated riders approaching. Tamara's brow furrowed. "My name is Tamara, not Mercy." Xavier's eyes, the color of storm clouds, met hers. "Mercy is what they should have shown you. It's also what they won't receive from me." He helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "There's a town called Florissant about 10 miles east. We'll find safety there for now." "My ranch," she protested weakly. "I can't leave it. We'll come back for it, Miss Fairchild." "That's a promise." As they rode away, Tamara leaned back against Xavier's chest, her strength fading. "Why would you help a stranger like this, Mr. Holden?" Xavier's voice was low and graveled when he finally answered. "Because I've been hunting Colter for months. He killed my brother." The ride to Florissant was arduous. Tamara drifted in and out of consciousness, the trauma and dehydration taking their toll. Xavier kept his arm firmly around her waist, ensuring she wouldn't fall. The setting sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape, painting the cacti and sandstone formations in brilliant reds and golds. Florissant appeared on the horizon just as the last light faded from the sky. The small mining town in the Arizona Territory was little more than a main street with wooden buildings on either side, but to Xavier, it represented safety. The lamplight from the saloon spilled out onto the dusty street, and a few townsfolk milled about, finishing their evening business. Xavier guided Storm toward the town's only hotel, a 2-story clapboard building with peeling white paint. As they approached, the hotel owner, a portly man named Franklin Wilson, stepped out onto the porch. "Mr. Holden," he called, recognizing the cowboy. "Trouble follows you like a shadow, I see." Xavier dismounted carefully, then lifted Tamara from the saddle. "Need a room, Frank, and a doctor if there's one in town." Franklin's eyes widened at the sight of Tamara's condition. "Colter's work," Xavier nodded grimly. "Take her inside." "I'll fetch Dr. Patterson." The hotel room was sparse but clean, a far cry from the luxury Tamara had known in her youth back east. Xavier laid her gently on the bed and pulled a chair beside it. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. Dr. Patterson arrived quickly, his medical bag in hand. He was an older man with kind eyes and a steady hand. "What happened to her?" he asked as he began his examination. "Tied to a tree for who knows how long. Dehydration, exposure, and those bruises suggest she put up one hell of a fight." The doctor nodded, cleaning the abrasions on Tamara's wrists. "She's a strong one, should recover with rest and care." Xavier stood by the window watching the street below. "I'll need supplies, planning to head out at first light." Dr. Patterson glanced up, concerned. "You're going after Colter?" "Alone. Been tracking him for months. Can't stop now." The doctor finished bandaging Tamara's wrists. She should not be left alone. Xavier's gaze returned to Tamara's sleeping form. "I'll be back before she wakes." He slipped out into the night, making his way to the general store. The owner, Martha Jenkins, was just closing up but opened the door when she recognized him. "Xavier Holden," she said, hands on her hips. "Haven't seen you in these parts for a while. Need supplies, Martha. Ammunition, dried meat, coffee." Martha gathered the items while Xavier examined a shelf of women's items: combs, hairpins, a small bottle of lavender water. On impulse, he added the lavender water to his purchases. "Someone special waiting for you?" Martha asked with a knowing smile. Xavier ignored the question. "Put it on my tab. You know I don't extend credit, X." He placed a small gold nugget on the counter. "This cover it?" Martha's eyes widened as she picked up the nugget. "This covers it and then some." Xavier nodded. "Keep the change." When he returned to the hotel room, Tamara was still sleeping. Dr. Patterson had left a bottle of laudanum and instructions for care. Xavier placed his purchases on the small table, then settled into the chair by the window, his Winchester rifle across his lap. As the night wore on, Tamara began to stir restlessly in her sleep. Xavier moved to her side, gently placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion evident in her gaze. "Where am I?" she whispered. "Fluorescent. You're safe now." Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Mr. Holden, you saved me." "Just doing what needed doing, madam." Tamara tried to sit up but winced in pain. Xavier helped her, propping pillows behind her back. "How long was I tied to that tree?" she asked. "Can't say for certain. How'd you come to be there?" Tamara's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the cup of water Xavier offered. "I inherited my father's ranch last year. Been running it on my own since then. Colter showed up 3 days ago, offering to buy it. Said he knew there was gold on the property." Her voice hardened. "I refused. That night, his men broke into my house, dragged me out." Xavier's expression remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened around his rifle. "The ranch valuable. It's all I have left of my father. The land's been in our family for 2 generations. And there's gold." Tamara's eyes met his, defiant. "If there is, it's mine by right." A smile tugged at Xavier's lips. "Yes, madam, it surely is." The following morning, Xavier woke before dawn. He'd spent the night in the chair, drifting in and out of sleep, his senses alert to any unusual sounds. Tamara still slept, her breathing steady and strong. Color had returned to her cheeks, and Xavier found himself studying her features in the soft morning light: the gentle curve of her jaw, the faint freckles across her nose, the auburn hair that spilled across the pillow. He shook off the thought and stood, stretching his tall frame. Today he would begin tracking Colter in earnest. He left a note explaining his absence, placed the bottle of lavender water beside it, and quietly slipped out of the room. The town was just beginning to stir as Xavier led Storm from the livery stable. He mounted up and was about to ride out when he heard his name called. Turning, he saw Tamara standing on the hotel porch, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. "You're leaving," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet street. Xavier tipped his hat. "Be back before sundown. I'm going with you." Xavier's expression hardened. "No, madam, you are not." Tamara crossed the street, her steps determined despite her obvious discomfort. "It's my ranch, Mr. Holden, my fight. You're in no condition, I know that land better than anyone. Every creek, every ridge, you need me." Xavier studied her for a long moment. The determination in her eyes reminded him of his brother, Thomas, stubborn to a fault and brave beyond reason. That bravery had cost Thomas his life. "Colter's men won't hesitate to kill you if they see you again," he said finally. "They'll try," Tamara replied, her voice steel. Against his better judgment, Xavier extended his hand. Tamara took it, and he pulled her up behind him on the saddle. "If there's trouble, you do exactly as I say. No questions, no arguments." "Agreed," she said, settling her arms around his waist. They rode east out of Florissant as the sun crested the horizon. Xavier kept Storm at a steady pace, mindful of Tamara's injuries. The desert landscape was beginning to bloom with spring wildflowers, splashes of yellow and purple against the red earth. "How did you come to be hunting Colter?" Tamara asked after they'd been riding for an hour. Xavier was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. "My brother Thomas and I had a silver claim near Prescott. Small operation but profitable. Colter wanted it. When we refused to sell, his men attacked our camp. Thomas was killed. I was left for dead." Tamara's arms tightened around him in a gesture of sympathy. "I'm sorry about your brother. Been tracking Colter ever since. Nearly had him in Yuma last month, but he slipped away." "What will you do when you find him?" Xavier's voice was cold. "What needs doing?" They rode in silence after that, each lost in their thoughts. Around midday, they stopped in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a stream. Xavier helped Tamara dismount and watched as she splashed cool water on her face. "Your ranch is about 3 miles south," he said, consulting a worn map. "If Colter found gold, he'll have men there." Tamara nodded, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "There's a ridge overlooking the main house. We can see the whole property from there without being spotted. Lead the way, Miss Fairchild." They approached the ridge cautiously, leaving Storm tied in a stand of mesquite trees. Crawling the last few yards, they peered over the edge at the ranch below. The main house was a substantial adobe structure with a stone chimney. A barn and corral stood nearby, and a small bunkhouse sat at the edge of the property. Several men moved about the yard, and Tamara inhaled sharply when she recognized one of them. "That's him, Colter, the one with the red bandana." Xavier narrowed his eyes, studying the man. Colter was tall and broad-shouldered, with a bushy beard and a swagger that spoke of arrogance and cruelty. A pistol hung low on his hip and a rifle was slung across his back. "I count 6 men, including Colter," Xavier murmured. "Too many to take head on." Tamara pointed to a spot beyond the main house. "They're digging over there. That must be where they think the gold is." Xavier nodded. "We'll wait until nightfall. Most will be sleeping then." They retreated to the stream to wait out the afternoon. Xavier checked and rechecked his weapons while Tamara gathered wood for a small, smokeless fire. As she worked, Xavier found himself watching her again. Despite her ordeal, she moved with grace and purpose, her hands strong and capable. "You handle yourself well out here," he observed. "Not many Eastern women would." Tamara smiled faintly. "I wasn't always. When Father first brought me out west, I was a proper Boston lady. Thought I'd die of heat and boredom." Her smile widened at the memory. "Father was patient, Taught me to ride, shoot, even wrangle cattle. Said a woman needed to be self-sufficient in this country. Wise man, he was, until the fever took him last year. Xavier nodded in understanding. My father died in the war. Mother followed a year later. Thomas was all I had left. Their eyes met across the small fire, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Tamara looked away first, her cheeks coloring slightly. We should rest before nightfall, Xavier suggested, breaking the silence. As the sun began to set, they made their way back to the ridge. The ranch was quieter now, with only 2 men visible, one standing guard by the main house, the other sitting on the porch, cleaning a gun. I'll take the guard, Xavier whispered. You stay here. Tamara shook her head. I told you, Mr. Holden, my fight. Before he could argue, she was sliding down the ridge, using the growing darkness as cover. Xavier cursed under his breath and followed. They split up at the base of the hill, Xavier circling toward the guard while Tamara approached the house from the rear. Xavier moved silently, years of hunting giving him a predator's stealth. The guard never heard him coming. A quick blow to the back of the head, and the man crumpled. Xavier dragged him into the shadows, binding and gagging him with strips of the man's own bandana. Meanwhile, Tamara slipped through the back door of her house, a place she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. She found a rifle in her father's study, loaded it, and moved toward the front of the house. Through the window, she could see the man on the porch, his back to her. A floorboard creaked beneath her foot. The man turned, reaching for his gun, but Tamara was faster. The rifle butt connected with his temple, and he slumped unconscious. Xavier appeared at the porch steps, eyes widening at the sight of Tamara standing over the unconscious man. Told you I could handle myself, she said with a grim smile. Together, they secured the second guard. Xavier checked the bunkhouse and found it empty. Where are the others? Tamara wondered. A shout from the direction of the digging site answered her question. Lights bobbed in the darkness, and the excited voices of men carried across the quiet night. They've found something, Xavier said, his voice tight. They crept toward the dig site, keeping to the shadows. In the glow of several lanterns, they could see Colter and 3 of his men standing around a hole in the ground. One of the men lifted something that glinted in the lamplight, a nugget of gold. There's your fortune, boss, the man said, handing the nugget to Colter. Colter examined it, his face split in a wide grin. Keep digging. There's more where that came from. Xavier's hand moved to his gun, but Tamara placed her hand over his, staying him. Not yet, she whispered. We're outnumbered. They retreated to the house to plan. Tamara lit a lamp in the kitchen, keeping the flame low. The familiar surroundings seemed to strengthen her, and Xavier noticed she stood taller, more confident. They'll be digging all night, she said, spreading a map of the property on the table. The vein must run here along the creek bed. Xavier studied the map. If we wait until they've dug up most of the gold, they'll move on. Might be the safest option. Tamara's eyes flashed. And let them steal what's rightfully mine. No, we fight. Xavier couldn't help but admire her spirit. Then we need a plan that doesn't end with us both dead. They spent the next hour discussing strategies, finally settling on one that played to their strengths. As they worked out the details, their heads bent close over the map. Xavier became acutely aware of Tamara's proximity, the faint lavender scent of her hair, the determined set of her jaw. It might work, he conceded when they'd finalized their plan. But it's risky. Tamara's smile was fierce. Living out here is risky, Mr. Holden. I've made my peace with that. They rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch. Just before dawn, they put their plan into motion. Xavier positioned himself on the ridge overlooking the dig site, where Colter and his men had worked through the night. They had accumulated a small pile of gold nuggets, which Colter had stored in a leather satchel. Tamara took Storm and rode to the far side of the property. At the agreed-upon time, she set fire to an abandoned shed. The flames quickly took hold, sending a column of black smoke into the early morning sky. The diversion worked. Two of Colter's men immediately ran toward the fire, leaving Colter and one other man at the dig site. Xavier took aim with his rifle and fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt at Colter's feet. "Next one goes through your head, Colter," Xavier shouted. Colter and his remaining man dove for cover behind a pile of dirt. "Who's there?" Colter called back. "The name's Holden. Xavier Holden." A pause, then Colter's laugh rang out. "Thomas Holden's brother, thought you were dead." "Not dead. Just patient." Colter signaled to his man, who began circling around to flank Xavier's position. Xavier spotted the movement and adjusted his aim, firing once. The man cried out and fell, clutching his shoulder. Meanwhile, Tamara had circled back after starting the fire. She approached the dig site from behind, moving silently through the brush. She could see Colter crouched behind the dirt pile, his attention focused on the ridge where Xavier was positioned. Raising her father's rifle, she called out, "Drop your weapon, Colter." Colter spun around, surprise evident on his face. "Well, if it ain't the ranch girl. Thought you'd be buzzard food by now." "Drop it," Tamara repeated, her voice steady. Colter's hand moved toward his gun. Tamara fired, the bullet grazing his arm. Colter howled in pain and dropped his pistol. Xavier was down the ridge in moments, his own gun trained on Colter. The two men Tamara had diverted with the fire were returning, but they stopped short at the sight of their boss held at gunpoint. "Tell your men to drop their weapons," Xavier ordered. Colter hesitated, his eyes calculating. Then, seeing no way out, he nodded to his men. "Do as he says." The men reluctantly discarded their guns. "Now the satchel," Tamara said, gesturing to the leather bag containing the gold. Colter's face twisted with rage. "You think this is over? I have friends in every territory from here to Texas." "You'll never," Xavier struck him across the face with the butt of his pistol, silencing the threat. "Tie them up," he told Tamara. "We're taking them to the sheriff in Florissant." By midday, Colter and his men were locked in the Florissant jail, awaiting transfer to Prescott for trial. The charges were numerous: murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, theft. The sheriff, a no-nonsense man named Mackenzie, assured Xavier and Tamara that Colter would hang for his crimes. Xavier and Tamara stood outside the sheriff's office, the reality of their success still sinking in. "What will you do now?" Tamara asked, watching Xavier's profile against the bright Arizona sky. Xavier considered the question. For months, his only purpose had been finding Colter. Now that was accomplished and he felt oddly adrift. "Not sure," he admitted. "Might head north. I hear Montana's got good land." Tamara looked down at her hands, suddenly uncertain. "My ranch is big, too big for one person, really." Xavier turned to face her, searching her expression. "What are you saying, Miss Fairchild?" "I'm saying I could use a partner, someone who knows ranching. Someone I can trust." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed in the midst of danger and shared purpose. "I'm not much for settling down," Xavier said slowly. Tamara's smile was tinged with disappointment but acceptance. "I understand. The offer stands should you change your mind." They parted ways at the hotel, Xavier promising to see her safely back to her ranch the next morning before continuing on his journey. That night, Xavier sat in the saloon, a untouched whiskey before him. The events of the past few days replayed in his mind, finding Tamara tied to that tree, her courage in the face of danger, the way she'd fought to reclaim what was hers. He thought of his brother Thomas and the promise they'd made to build something lasting in this harsh frontier. When morning came, Xavier was waiting outside the hotel with Storm saddled and ready. Tamara emerged, dressed in clothes Martha Jenkins had helped her purchase, a simple riding skirt and blouse that suited her far better than the fancy Eastern fashions Xavier had imagined her wearing. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. As they crested the ridge overlooking the property, Tamara reined in her horse, a chestnut mare she'd purchased in town. "It looks different now," she said softly. "Knowing what lies beneath it," Xavier nodded. "Gold changes things, changes people." "Not all people," Tamara replied, glancing at him. They rode down to the main house. The signs of Colter's occupation were still evident: boot prints in the dirt, discarded whiskey bottles, the remains of campfires. Tamara dismounted and walked slowly through the yard, taking inventory of what needed repair. "It'll take work to set everything right," she observed. Xavier dismounted as well, tying Storm to the hitching post. He should say his goodbyes now, he knew. Montana was a long ride and he'd already delayed his departure. Instead, he found himself saying, "I could stay a few days, help with the repairs." The smile that lit Tamara's face made something tighten in Xavier's chest. "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Holden." "Xavier," he corrected. "Or X if you prefer." "Xavier," she repeated, the name sounding different and her voice softer, more significant somehow. A few days turned into a week, then two. Together, they repaired the damage to the ranch, mending fences, cleaning the house, rehiring the ranch hands who had fled when Colter arrived. They established a routine: early mornings checking the cattle, afternoons working on the house, evenings spent on the porch, talking as the desert sky turned from blue to orange to deepest purple. Xavier learned that Tamara had been educated at a finishing school in Boston, that she could quote Shakespeare and calculate complex figures in her head. She'd come west with her father after her mother's death, initially hating the wild, open spaces, but gradually falling in love with the freedom they represented. Tamara discovered that beneath Xavier's taciturn exterior was a thoughtful man who had read every book he could get his hands on during the long winters in Colorado, where he'd grown up. He'd taught himself to play the harmonica and could identify any constellation in the night sky. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tamara asked about the gold. "What should we do with it? It's yours as much as mine now." Xavier considered the question. "Could expand the ranch, buy more cattle, improve the irrigation." "Is that what you want?" He was silent for a long moment. "Never thought much about what I wanted beyond finding Colter. Revenge doesn't leave room for other dreams." Tamara's hand found his in the growing darkness. "Perhaps it's time to make new dreams." Their eyes met, and Xavier felt something shift inside him, a wall crumbling, a door opening to a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. The first time Xavier kissed Tamara was during a spring thunderstorm. They'd been caught in the downpour while checking fences on the north pasture and had taken shelter in an old line shack. Rain drummed on the tin roof as they built a small fire in the ancient stove. Tamara stood by the single window, watching lightning illuminate the landscape in brief, brilliant flashes. Xavier moved to stand beside her, drawn by the wonder in her expression. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Dangerous, but beautiful." When she turned to look at him, droplets of rain still clinging to her hair, Xavier couldn't resist any longer. He cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded eagerly. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Tamara smiled. "I was beginning to think you'd never do that." Xavier's laugh was low and warm. "Been wanting to since I found you tied to that tree." "That's hardly romantic, Xavier Holden." He kissed her again, more deeply this time. "I'll work on that." The line shack became their sanctuary over the following weeks, a private place away from the curious eyes of the ranch hands. They would ride out together, ostensibly to check cattle or fences, and spend hours talking, planning, and discovering each other. It was there, on a clear June afternoon, that Xavier finally told Tamara the full story of his brother's death, not just the facts he'd shared before, but the raw emotion of it. How he'd held Thomas as he died, promising vengeance. How empty that promise had felt once it was fulfilled. "I thought killing Colter would bring peace," he confessed, his head in Tamara's lap as she stroked his hair. "But it was finding you that did that." Tamara leaned down to kiss him softly. "We found each other, I think." A week later, Xavier rode into Florissant alone, a man on a mission. He visited the bank first, depositing a portion of the gold they'd recovered and setting up accounts in both their names. Next, he visited Martha Jenkins at the general store, purchasing supplies for the ranch, and one special item that he tucked carefully into his vest pocket. His final stop was the small church at the end of the main street. The minister, Reverend Brown, was sweeping the steps when Xavier approached. "Good afternoon, Mr. Holden," the Reverend greeted him. "What brings you to the Lord's house today?" Xavier removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "Need some advice, Reverend, about marriage." The older man's face broke into a knowing smile. "Miss Fairchild is a fine woman. You'd be blessed to have her as a wife." "If she'll have me," Xavier replied. "I've seen the way she looks at you, son. I'd say your chances are good." That evening, as the sun set over the Fairchild ranch, Xavier and Tamara sat on the porch swing he'd built for her birthday the previous month. The ranch was prospering, the cattle herd growing, the house improvements nearly complete, and plans for an expanded orchard underway. "I stopped by the assayer's office in town today," Tamara said, her head resting on Xavier's shoulder. "The gold from the creek bed is some of the purest he's seen. He thinks the vein runs deep." Xavier nodded, only half listening. His mind was on the small box in his pocket and the question he needed to ask. "Tamara," he began, his voice unusually hesitant, "I've been thinking about the future." She sat up, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What about it?" Xavier took her hands in his. "When I found you tied to that tree, I was a man with nothing but revenge in his heart. You changed that. You showed me there was still good worth fighting for." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small diamond. "I'm asking if you'll let me fight for that good for us for the rest of our lives." Tears welled in Tamara's eyes as she looked from the ring to Xavier's face. "Are you asking me to marry you, Xavier Holden?" "I am." "Will you?" Her answer was a kiss that conveyed everything words could not: love, acceptance, promise. They were married in September 1874 in the small church in Florissant. The entire town turned out for the ceremony, along with ranchers from miles around. Tamara wore a dress of cream silk ordered from San Francisco, and Xavier wore a new black suit that still felt stiff and unfamiliar. As they exchanged vows, Xavier thought of how far they had come from that first meeting, a woman tied to a tree, a man consumed by vengeance. Now they stood together, building a future neither had imagined possible. The Fairchild Holden Ranch prospered in the years that followed. The gold from the creek bed funded expansions and improvements, but Xavier and Tamara were careful not to let it change the essential nature of their lives. They worked alongside their hands, maintained fair business practices, and became known throughout the territory for their hospitality and generosity. Their first child, a daughter they named Alina, was born in the summer of 1876. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's storm-gray eyes. Xavier, who had once thought himself incapable of any tender emotion beyond grief, found himself utterly transformed by fatherhood. He would spend hours with Alina, showing her the stars, teaching her to ride almost as soon as she could walk, reading to her from the growing library of books they collected. A son, Thomas, followed in 1878, named for the uncle he would never meet but whose memory lived on in the stories Xavier shared. And finally, in 1880, their family was complete with the arrival of another daughter, Grace. The legend of Xavier Holden and how he had found his wife tied to a tree grew with the telling. In saloons and around campfires across the territory, men spoke of the cowboy who had taken on the notorious Colter Gang for the love of a woman. Some said he had killed 20 men to free her. Others claimed he had tracked Colter across 3 territories before bringing him to justice. Xavier would laugh when he heard these exaggerated tales. "The truth is far simpler," he would tell his children. "I found a woman with courage that matched my own, and together we built something worth fighting for." On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Xavier took Tamara back to the ancient oak tree where they had first met. The scars on the trunk where the ropes had cut into the bark were still visible, a permanent reminder of that day. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't ridden by that day?" Tamara asked as they stood hand in hand beneath the spreading branches. Xavier considered the question. "I believe we were meant to find each other, if not here then somewhere." Tamara smiled, the years having only enhanced her beauty in Xavier's eyes. "Such a romantic, Mr. Holden. Who would have thought it of the stern cowboy who cut me free?" Xavier pulled her into his arms, his voice low and intense. "They'll learn to fear mercy now," he repeated the words he had spoken that day. "I meant it then as a threat to Colter, but I've come to see it differently." "How so?" Tamara asked, her arms encircling his waist. "Mercy wasn't what I withheld from Colter. It was what I found with you. The mercy of second chances, of love after loss, of building something that will outlast us both." As they rode back to the ranch where their children waited, the setting sun painted the desert in the same brilliant hues as on that fateful day. But where once Xavier had seen only the harsh beauty of a land that took without giving, he now saw the promise of each new day, a promise made possible by the woman who rode beside him, who had transformed vengeance into love, and a lone cowboy into a man with a future. The Fairchild Holden legacy continued to grow through the decades. Alina, their firstborn, inherited her mother's head for business and her father's determination. She expanded the ranch's operations to include breeding some of the finest horses in the territory. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, becoming known as one of the most skilled trackers in Arizona, often called upon by the territorial marshals when they needed to find those who didn't wish to be found. And Grace, their youngest, surprised them all by pursuing an education in medicine, eventually returning to Florissant as the town's first female doctor. Xavier and Tamara watched their children grow with pride, their love for each other deepening with each passing year. The gold from their land brought prosperity, but they measured their true wealth in family, in community, and in the legacy they were building together. In 1899, as the century drew to a close, Xavier and Tamara stood on the porch of their ranch house, gray-haired now but still strong. The ranch had grown beyond what either could have imagined: thousands of acres, hundreds of cattle, orchards heavy with fruit, and a reputation that extended far beyond the borders of what was now the state of Arizona. "We did well, didn't we?" Tamara said, leaning against Xavier's shoulder as they watched the sunset. Xavier's arm tightened around her waist. Better than well. We did right. And in that moment, as the last light of the 19th century faded from the sky, they both knew that the true gold they had discovered wasn't in the creek bed at all. It was in the life they had built from the ashes of vengeance, and the bonds of love that had begun when a cowboy saw a woman tied to a tree and decided that mercy could mean more than just forgiveness. It could mean a second chance, a new beginning, and a love story that would be told for generations to come.